some way. So this is actually an Italian sonnet, or my attempt at an Italian sonnet. It's called Dying Flames. Even as we see others' flames gutter out, we cannot fathom that we will suffer a similar fate. We assume rather that we're not subject to the same cruel rout that sweeps the multitude from life's bright stage. Even as the years pass and silent age steals up on us, we know not what we're about. We think our little light will beat the odds. We carry on like our lives have no term, and that we have the endurance of the gods who preside over the seasons like the stars. But deep down in our very bones we know that what makes us in the end also mars us and drops the curtain on our too brief show. So that's my Italian sonnet. Okay, the next poem I want to read was motivated or touched off by seeing a PBS program on how whales communicate in the depths of the ocean. And I thought that's a very poetic and beautiful subject by itself already. This is called Whale Songs. Did the first angels of the antique world hear those mysterious sounds of the deep blue and wonder if they were a terrestrial echo of the music of the spheres? Such cerulean sonic booms constitute a magisterial symphony subtending our world. Those giant baritones of the seas still sound in our blood if we have spirit ears to hear shut-eyed the resonating calls from the primeval depths that sustain the floating continents on the sleek backs of those gargantuan dancers of the deep, gliding so far below, signaling to each other in the silent seas, sounding the calls of their ancient world.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, the next poem is sort of my view of myself as a poet. It's called Whistling in the Wind. and it's also a 14-line poem, unrhymed sonnet. All his long life he had whistled in the wind. His wayward notes blew back against his face like wet leaves. His lame attempts never found a resonance, yet he kept on resolutely blowing refractory tunes through pursed lips. Perhaps there was a secret melody there that none could hear. Perhaps the scattered fragments of sound found their harmony in some other world, tuned to a different key. Perhaps his whistling in the wind realized there its proper form and found a home. Or could it be that the act of simply whistling was all the satisfaction that he ever sought for the silent song sounding in his heart? This poem is touched off by a friend, a New Zealand friend who was diagnosed with early Alzheimer's, I think 4 years ago. He's a brilliant physicist, mathematician, his field is fluid dynamics. And he had to retire. He taught one more seminar and retired, and he can't even answer my emails anymore. Now this is not so much about him, it's just about the phenomenon of Alzheimer's. Okay, Alzheimer's for a friend. At first, smidgens or shards of darkness, like crows rising in a distant field, striated the furthest edges of his consciousness. Much later, tides of absence and lagoons of the unrecoverable began to flood the landscape of the familiar under a perpetually setting sun. The distant horizon grew fainter and fainter and slowly faded away into the silence of night. And then the deep dark of the eternal sea folded into itself even the faintest trace of any residual memory. All of these poems are quite short, so I hope that helps. This one came about when I was sitting in the woods on a log, and the phrase popped into my head: is it habit or is it habitude? You know, habitude, H-E-B-E-T-U-D-E, habitude. Is it habit or habitude? Is it habit or merely habitude that makes me sit so still on the massive trunk of this fallen tree and watch the noontime sunlight filtering through the bright curtain of late spring leaves, sheltering me under broad branches in this lush green retreat, listening to the intermittent calls of birds whose names I do not know? Is it that I feel grounded here in this leaf-screened haven so far removed from the traffic of the world? Is it because here I can come home to myself, even as I take in the hidden life pulsing all around me? This next little poem is called Strange, and it partly deals with how we as adults, we are very far away from our childhood. We get further and further away from our childhood, including the language of our childhood. Now, in my case, a complicating factor is that the language of my childhood was a dialect of Austrian German, which is almost completely alien to me now. I can barely understand it. Okay, so it's partly about the difference between being a child and an adult. Strange. Strange it is how we remember and do not remember scenes from our childhood, that faraway country, where people speak a foreign idiom we once knew, like the inside of our mouth, but that is not as unfamiliar as a crater on the moon, of a distant star in another galaxy, where we were once quite at home with our native tongue. This next poem is a little naughty. It's called Old Men. And by the way, this collection is called Whistling in the Wind, or Few Things Old Men Know, okay? This is Old Men. He was watching the pure lineaments of the sky when a group of young women in tight shorts walked by. Being old, he knew that only the beauty of the mind endures, and that the beauty of the flesh is as fleeting as summer rain. But being old, he also knew that no matter how true the former, old men prefer the latter time and again, when it emerges so sudden out of the blue. All right. And this one is sort of Blakean little proverbs. A few things old men know. These are some of the things that old men know. What you aspire to in your youth will come back to haunt you in your later years. A kindness you performed unthinkingly may someday pay rich dividends. Those who insist too righteously on justice usually harbor bloody thoughts in their hearts. Hold on to something too tight and you break it. Hold it too loose and you will lose it. There's no quicker way to fail than after sudden success. Sooner or later, too much officiousness, no matter how apparently in control of the day, will break its own neck. Sometimes, even as one door closes, another opens, so long as you let one door close and don't expect another to open. Ron, this one is for you. The longer you live, the more you realize that the deep structure of the world imitates the deep structure of Shakespeare's plays. Those who cry out too much against public corruption may have designs on your wallet. The young have their hopes, the old their memories. This next poem was touched off by seeing in Oxford, England, where I taught a summer course at New College, two women in a passionate embrace in a very public space, a very passionate sexual embrace in a public space. In my 1950s self, for a moment recoiled, and then this poem came into my mind as I walked down the street. On seeing two women in a passionate embrace, New College, July 2012. Oh, let them love, if love it is, for love is bliss. Oh, let them kiss in a passionate embrace, and let them give each other's all, for love, even after the fall, is paradisiacal. Oh, let them love and hold each other dear, so tender and so near. And let them prove in their entwined togetherness that the bonds of true love reach far beyond the mere material contingencies of womb and tomb. Last summer, also in England, I was watching the opening ceremonies of the Olympics on television, and at one point, Kenneth Branagh appeared and read some lines from Shakespeare's Tempest, lines by Caliban. And I assume you all know who Caliban is, right? And Shakespeare's his last complete play of Tempest, this humanoid creature who had the island to himself until Prospero and his daughter Miranda were shipwrecked on it. And presumably by the end of the play, Caliban will be left behind on the island and everybody else goes back. Prospero the magician to what is it? I'm trying to remember, Milan. To Milan, yes. Having married off, having arranged the marriage of his daughter Miranda to Ferdinand, the son of the King of Naples. Anyway, So Caliban presumably is going to be alone on the island again. So this is called Caliban Abandoned. Caliban Abandoned. This island's all mine own again, with its haunting melodies of wind and rain. Prospero's taken his books and his daughter, and left me here to fend for myself. I coveted both when I served his winds, his books for the potent spells they contained, and Miranda to people as I'll look at Calibans. At night, I still hear strange sounds that charm my ears and make me forget the pregnant hag who littered me here. I was taught to name the greater and the lesser lights that shine by day and night, by the usurper I sought to kill for forcing me to do his bidding. Alone again, I've come to realize that the only freedom is that of the mind. Impatient and domineering as he was, he didn't think that I could learn. Little faith had he, and gave me less credit. But learn for his tutelage I did. Though what good this knowledge can do me, in the wake of his departure, I have yet to discover as I attend to the strange sounds that play about my ears, and make me wonder exactly who and where I am in my complete and utter abandonment. This poem I wrote when leaving Oxford in August of last summer, because I thought I would never be back to teach the Hum 2 course again. And I taught there 6 times beginning in 1997, and loving every moment of it, and loving being at New College, particularly the garden there. So I wrote this as Oxford leave taking. Well, as it turns out, I was back there again this summer, not teaching, but on a visit, and I will be teaching a course there again in summer 2016. So it's a little bit premature, but Oxford leave taking. On my last day here, after 6 summers of teaching the exuberant young, I watched 3 white doves perched atop a spire rising high above the chapel in a pure blue evening sky in the Harry Potter cloisters of New College. 44 years ago, I bid a similar farewell to Cambridge on my last day as a student at King's College, mesmerized by the roses of Great St. Mary's that seemed to impart a message to my soul of the enduring beauty of the mind present here for untold centuries. This glorious evening is privileged. There is the cooing of the pigeons, the tolling of the 7 o'clock bells, and then the quiet of the green lawns and flower beds in the college garden, where I take the full measure of this place that seems momentarily suspended in time. The medieval monks who cultivated the arts of thought and prayer in these ghostly cloisters must have known the peace that passes understanding. This fabled place, so haunted by the past, and not immune to the blood spilled by the passing generations, is yet an island of peace in a time full of noise and the riot of competing flames that leave their daily scars on the body of a dangerous and troubled world. But here in the silence of stone and flower, I know that there is rested for those who cultivate the quiet of the concentrated soul, and that even as our little lives are fretted and frittered away in the pedestrian fever of the day, there yet is a realm of things that endure. On this charmed and serene August evening of white doves and blue skies, I know in my aging bones that this is and will always be so in our relentlessly driven lives, where there's so little time for the reflective pauses of the contemplating mind. This poem came to me when I was half awake, and I just wrote it down. I don't have a clue what it means. Winter roses. Winter's deep in the roses, they glow like pink candles in the drifting snow. The birds of paradise sing in the frozen trees. In the graveyard, the entombed lovers embrace and dance the can-do. The hallelujah choruses on the distant horizon shrill in the bones of the earth. The hoar-frosted moon sings of days to come. This is a poem about picking blackberries. Have you ever picked blackberries and got all scratched up? And the you in the poem is Elsha, okay, the you. Special occasion. In the lowering heat of late summer, you harvested them in an old bucket hung over your arm with mosquitoes buzzing about you and your hands getting scratched by thorns and brambles in the thickets. You had to push your way through to reach the rich, shiny black clusters of ripe berries. Bucket full after sweaty hours on the hunt, You trudge back home in triumph and wash the blackberries in the kitchen sink before packing them in plastic bags to be put in the freezer. The first richly moist bunch was a rare and delicious treat, tart dessert piquant on our eager tongues. I insisted that we have the frozen ones only on rare and special occasions. Untouched, they lay for years in the deep freeze, waiting for the right time. When we moved to a new house, they moved with us. And then lay for months more at the bottom of a pile, forgotten and forlorn. When you clean out the freezer, you wanted to toss the bags in the garbage because you were sure the berries had spoiled. But stubborn eyes said no. Let's defrost them because I bet they're still okay. They were, sort of, but had lost all their taste and aura, wet and neutral rain berries in our mouths. I took the remaining bags and threw them in the trash. That was the special occasion we had saved them for all these years. All right. I've been a fan of American folk music since my college days, beginning with people like John Baez and Bob Dylan. I only discovered a few years ago a guy called Townes Van Zandt. Any of you know his work, Townes Van Zandt? He's a contemporary. Born in 1944, died in 1997. He's written some famous songs like Pancho and Lefty, performed by Willie Nelson, by Gillian Welch, and also by Emmylou Harris. He basically burned himself out. He made a living off other people doing his songs. I think he's one of the most talented folk singers this country has produced. He died, do the math, 1944 to 1997. He died fairly young. Substance abuse, mostly alcohol. And I mentioned, this is for Townes Van Zandt, and I mentioned a couple of his songs I've been passing into. Nike-like, your poet's soul has taken wing on flying shoes. I think of you somewhere out there in the trackless wild, on the run with Pancho and Lefty. Outlaw, rambling, guitar-playing bard. Your sad songs I hear sounding in the wind and the rain and the river, whose voices you recorded in your haunting melodies. Footloose stargazer, wind stalker. Even as you sought to soothe your pain, you found your way to an untimely grave. Sainted singer lost in the labyrinth of our dark world. Your voice now is free to the elements. Free to the elements is a line I stole from Shakespeare's Tempest. This poem is based on Wordsworth's Intimations of Immortality Ode. It's sort of a take on it. And it takes it's an epigraph, The Child is Father of the Man, this famous poem that Wordsworth wrote that he used an epigraph of the Intimations of. So the child is father of the man. My father of the man, sky, was wide open then, the horizon far away. The blank slate of my child self bore no burdens, troubling my mind other than the doings of the day. The past was an invisible cloud hanging over me, quite unaware. My shadow unseen by me, I carried the ancestral signature of my genes without the pull of atemporal gravity. I did not know, I did not need to know, I did not care to know, that the neural network of my mind was written in the blood of generations, that my future might consummate their secret dreams, that my failures might damn, my successes indemnify them. I did not know that whatever I would do or could do or wish to do was simply a variation on a theme or a repetition in a different key. I did not care that my life was a reprint of an old book based on an ancient manuscript written in the language of the stars. I did not know that whatever I would choose to do had been done uncounted times before, would be done unnumbered times more. I did not know, I did not care to know. This is a kind of a playful poem in some ways about Virginia Woolf's suicide. I've taught her novel to the Lighthouse over the years a number of times, and I deeply admire her style of writing in that book. So this is sort of a take on, she committed suicide at 59 by walking into the river. It's spelled O-U-S-E, and I looked it up, it's pronounced ooze, okay, not ouse, but ooze. And I'm also trying to work a little bit with internal rhymes, rhymes from one line to the next in the middle of the line, as opposed to at the end. Quiet as a mouse, Virginia Woolf left her house and walked into the river Ouse at the age of 59. She put her walking stick on the ground and looked around for heavy stones to put in her coat pocket to weigh her down for good. Days later, her stick was found by the riverbank, and those who knew her guessed the rest. What was she thinking as she walked into this liquid underworld? Did she assume she was one of Ophelia's daughters, seeking a room of her own as she sank under the water to be bedded in an oozy grave? Did she believe that this was her last will and testament, written in the wet element? Was she seeking to seal her own legend with her last breath? Or was her sinking death simply the inevitable final act of a lifelong struggle against despair? One of the poems that I admire the most is by Dylan Thomas, that famous Sistina, do not go gentle into that good night, rage, rage against the dying of the light. Absolutely splendid poem. I thought, I want to write a Sistina too. It's not an easy form. And this poem was actually touched off by walking in the woods, and the phrase that popped into my head is the naked wonder of our seeing. So I thought I'd try to build a Sistina around that. The poem is called Perplexity. The raw perplexity of our being fell upon me as I walked in the wood, and the naked wonder of our seeing. Lost in the fog of our self-seeking, none of us can glimpse the sky of our own good in the raw perplexity of our being. I've hunted trails that led to no clearing. No compass had I, no water, no food, only the naked wonder of our seeing. Some pilgrim souls forge paths of their own making, and some, lost in the labyrinth, know they should face the raw perplexity of their being. Some soldier on in the dark with hearts aching, and some know they would be happy if they could feel the naked wonder of our seeing. I should walk in the wood by way of freeing me from the world's bias, if only I could face the raw perplexity of our being and the naked wonder of our seeing. This is probably a poem that older folks like me can understand. It's called Little Things. Little Things. Late in life, I found my place in littleness. After the big dreams of my youth had fizzled out like pricked balloons, the little has become the order of my day. Of the many books I've read, I've barely retained a smidgen, and I've gained even less knowledge of the refractory human heart. So much aspiration, so much effort and anxiety, and pray tell for what? I've found now that it's the little things that ground my being and anchor me in this perplexing world. The sound of birds in the wood, of water gurgling in the brook, of the wind in the trees is what I've come to count on. The stone slabs I lug home from the brook bed feel most real to me as their gravity pulls on my knees, shoulders, and back, consoling signifiers of the material world we take for granted. It's these little things I've come to appreciate, and I leave the big to those who still aspire. The little is where I'm at. And another New College poem from this past summer. Once again in New College, is a little shorter. New College Garden, Oxford, July 15, 2013. Here I sit on this wrought iron bench, observing these creatures of the air. The distant yellowish butterfly fluttering past a leaf, the large blue-gray birds winging their silent way from branch to branch of the deep-rooted colossal trees, the pigeons momentarily perched and cooing on the ancient stone wall. These unassuming denizens of the garden go about their present business, not heeding in the least my observant human self. Their lives, no doubt, are short and fleeting compared to mine, but they don't seem to mind. 1,000 years amounting to about 20 human lifetimes, more or less, in some sense are also fleeting. Less than nothing even, I think, in the grand scheme of things. All those lives lived, come and gone, coming and going, year after year, and here I sit in silent thought, taking in the non-human doings of these mysterious creatures who in their own way may well know what we humans forever fail to process in all the opacity of our conscious being. And I'm going to end on two poems on a lighter note. This is my Joe the Lost Poet, a poem that John Roche, who used to teach at Genesee and now teaches at RIT, is doing an anthology of poems about this mysterious, putative character called Joe. And he mentioned this to me, so I wrote this for him. It had to be a 10-line poem. So what I imagine Joe as a poet who was part of the original team writing the lyrical ballads, Wordsworth and Coleridge revolutionized English poetry in 1798 by publishing lyrical ballads and a few other poems. It was published by a guy called Joseph Cottle in Bristol, and it entirely changed the future of English poetry, the lyrical ballads. So I'm imagining Joe the Lost Poet was a member of this team, okay? In 1798, there actually were three who teamed up in the vein of lyrical balladry. Will, Wordsworth, Sam, Coleridge, and Joe. But just as Pete Best was sent to his rest as a Beatle, so Joe the Poet was axed from the famous volume that appeared in Bristol. Mostly because Cottle, the publisher, found Joe's ballads too lachrymose and foolish. The drowned kitten who haunted the murderer until he hanged himself, and others even more ghoulish. So Joe had to go, forever lost to fame and letters. All right, this is my last poem, and it's actually a poem in progress. It's still a draft. And it plays on the title, on the first line of Yeats' Sailing to Byzantium. I call it Country of Old Men for my 70th birthday. Epigraph, that is no country for old men, and then at the poem, the young in each other's arms, etc. All right, so this is precariously balanced between humor and pathos and possible pathos, okay? When you have to get up several times during the night to empty your bladder, and your stream becomes a mere trickle, you know that you have arrived in the country of old men. When your enlarging prostate makes you prostrate with frustration, you know that you're no longer in the country of the young. When you number your past in a cascade of decades, as you contemplate a future of possible single digits, you know that you really are in the country of the old. When you turn to introduce an old friend and draw a blank on her name, and when indeed you realize that at some point more of your friends will be dead than alive, then you begin to appreciate that you've reached a serious stage of advancing age. When you can't remember things your spouse told you did long ago, but you know she's right, why then you can rest assured you have an advanced degree in graying beyond maturity. When you observe the young in each other's arms with equanimity and no trace of envy, then you know you're in a different world at a great remove from who you once were. When your bucket list grows shorter day by day, and your audit of broken promises will brook no delay, you know old age, that unwelcome guest, has settled in to stay. When the thought of letting go of all you know of this world fails to fill you with dread, and you accept that all you've done is so very little next to what you might have achieved, then you have to accept that you are not, to quote Bob Dylan, by way of John Keats, forever young. And when you are filled with simple curiosity as to what there might be after the final farewell, and most likely no auf Wiedersehen or au revoir, then you know just where you stand, and that you've had your passport stamped at the border of the country of old men.